Welcome to the Peace of Living podcast. We are your hosts, Jason
and Allison.
And we're so glad to be back with you tonight and this new year. And we're especially glad tonight to have one of our dear, dear friends in the ward with us, Jesse Palmer. Woo! Yeah. Clap, 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 clap. So Jesse is in our ward, and we've known him for a few years. When did you move into the ward now?
4 years.
4 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah. And we've kind of gradually become better and better friends over the last 4 years. And Jesse's just always been like a huge, and I'm not just saying this to make you feel good because you're here, but like Jesse's always been like a really good example, a spiritual example. He's his head's getting bigger as I'm speaking, but like I've always just really admired Jesse. And like, so I think it was like about a year or so ago, like Jesse and I were chatting. I don't even remember where it was. It was like at a party or something. But anyway, I know I'm like speaking for you, so feel free to step in here. But Jesse had mentioned that he had some like questions and stuff. And then just this last Sunday in Fast and Testimony meeting, he got up and shared his testimony in Fast and Testimony meeting. And it was so awesome. And you kind of alluded to just how you've gotten to where you're at spiritually, and maybe how your questions, where a year or so or a couple, I don't even know your history really, but like where they may have bothered you quite a bit, you were at the point where they didn't bother you as much now. And I thought immediately, we have to have Jesse on. We have to have him on because the testimony was so good. And and Jesse, just one more thing before you kind of, to take it, but he really is probably one of the most Christ-centered people I've met. And it's like, seriously, like if you know Jesse, you know that he loves Jesus Christ. And so anyway, him testifying of the peace that he experienced in his heart, throughout his like spiritual journey was really inspiring. And so we wanted to have him on. So thanks for coming on, Jesse.
Yeah, thanks. Nice
So
words.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really do mean it, man. So let's maybe start like back kind of like, I don't know, in your younger years, I guess, like when you think back of like your youth, your young adult years, which is still kind of right now, but like, how would you describe like the development of your faith in Jesus Christ? Have there been any experiences, or were there any experiences then that kind of started you on gaining your faith and testimony of Jesus Christ and his restored gospel? And if so, like what sorts of things kind of come to mind?
Yeah. So I've thought a lot about this, because I'd like to say that I've got a great story being a child. And I had great parents growing up, went to church, read the scriptures. We did like all the checkbox things that we needed to do. But looking back, I did not like doing any of it. I didn't like going to church. I didn't like serving for young men's, which was always baling hay or doing something for a family in the ward. I just didn't like it. And I think a lot of the youth I was around, we felt the same.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so as I was thinking back on this question, there was an experience that I had as probably an early teenager that really kind of shaped the way who I am now. And I didn't realize it until I really started thinking about where my journey really began. I feel like I'm a late bloomer in many aspects, and spiritually for sure I am. But the experience I had, it was wintertime, like we have now, right outside, this big blizzard going on. And it was in the evening, probably 5:30. This is up in Park City and Silver Creek. And we get in the family car and we leave. And I don't remember where we're going, but at the gas station, there was a homeless family sitting outside, and it was just dumping snow all over them.
Mm.
And without hesitation, my dad whipped around, pulled over, and him and my mom got out, and they had a conversation with the people. And they got back in the car, told us to get in the very back, in the storage area of the, I think they had an excursion or something like that. And we got in the back of the car, and they brought this family in. The gas station wouldn't let them stay inside during the storm. There's nowhere, for them to go. And so we drive a few miles down the road. He asks them, what their names are, where they're from, how they got here, etc. And anyways, they ended up putting them up in a hotel that night, gave them extra money, and they found transportation to wherever their next destination was.
Wow.
And I just remember when my dad got in the car, like as we were driving down, I think we were heading down to Salt Lake, and I was just like I was just so proud to be a Palmer. I was like so proud of my parents right then. Like I thought, there was just power in the car. It was unspoken. Nobody said anything about it. And that really, really had a big impact on me, because now that's not, and this is like no pat on my back, but I try to do those same things. And I'm chasing that feeling that my parents gave me then.
Yeah.
And it's there every time. Every time we see like a homeless person, we'll stop with Evie, Berkeley, whoever, and we'll take them to the train station. We'll get them tickets. We'll, kind of do whatever. But we always get to know them. We ask their names. So for example, we were down at the gas station probably 4 or 5 months ago. No, it's been longer, maybe 6 months ago. And this gentleman, his name's Sam, walked in. You knew he was homeless. Couldn't read. He was holding everything like very close to his face. He was clearly blind as well. And anyways, Evie, out of all people, she's so sweet, my daughter. And she said, "Dad, do you think we should do something?" And it was, yeah, no brainer. Like, we have to.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked to Sam, we bought him food, everything he needed, and got him in the car and took him over to what is it called? The tracks.
Mm-hmm.
The tracks. Got him tickets. And anyways, that experience is something that Evie brings up all the time now.
Wow.
So, and I know this is all kind of wrapping into where we're headed with the conversation, but my dad taught me at an early age that true ministering is that it's not who your assignment is, although that does matter. Are we aware of our surroundings? Are we paying attention to people that are in need? And I feel like that's who I am now. Is I try to be at least one that looks around for other people. That was probably the biggest experience as a kid that shaped me.
Well, and then thanks for sharing that. And, for those of you listening, like, it's cool to see Jesse in our neighborhood and in our ward, because I've seen you do those things, like look around and be aware of the people around you. And it's like, when I think of Jesse Palmer, I think of like the gospel, Jesus Christ in action. Like, you take action. And I'll never forget, like, it was only like a month ago. This was like recently. You came over here. We were talking about actually, podcasting. You came over here like a month ago. It was on Sunday. And, I'm just like chilling in my sweats. And you come over in your shirt and tie. And I was like, I kind of like poked fun at you. Do you remember that? I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're all dressed up. And you're like, oh, I just stopped by, this guy's house that we love, in the ward, because he had just had shoulder surgery. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, yeah, like, cool. Like, how's he doing? You're like, oh, I just want to stop by and say, I'm like, well, I felt so stupid asking, but I was like genuinely curious. I was like, well, are you like assigned as his minister? And you're like, no. And I'm like, that's like, I sound so stupid right now, but like, it's, I just thought that was like so cool. And
thanks. But that doesn't happen often.
But
so
it does happen. Like, you do it though, like that's cool. And it stuck with me,
Yeah.
Anyway, that's awesome, man. Thank you. So, okay. So leading on from that, as you maybe have grown into more of like your adult years with marriage and with kids and kind of like establishing like your own life, what would you say has kind of nurtured your testimony the most during your adult life so far?
My wife.
Awesome. Why? Why do you
She's
say
nurtured
that?
it.
She's amazing.
I was hoping you would bring her up
Yeah.
because if you didn't, I was going to.
Oh, she's great. Just going back, marriage it hasn't been easy. Our first years of marriage were pretty difficult, and we separated at one point. It was just way hard. And we finally decided we're going to try to make this work. We had our one daughter, Berkeley, and she was maybe 2 or 3. And we moved back together, and we just started working on it. And we were told by our bishop, which this is a common saying, I think, within the church. But at that time, it was big for us. He said, the more that you guys focus on Christ individually, the closer that you'll get together. And I don't remember like us making that exact effort, like, okay, every night we're going to read our scriptures and we're going to do this, that, and the other. But I know we did make a change. We started going to church regularly, which we hadn't been regularly going. We started reading, and I don't know how it happens, and you guys have probably felt it, but your hearts just become healed. And before you know it, you're 10 years down the road, and you've created habits of reading and praying and, trying to speak kindly, not scream at your kids too much. And that was the biggest thing. So can I share a story on that?
Please. Yeah, please.
So I watched this movie. I was just thinking about this last night because I watched this movie called, The Society of the Snow, or Society in the Snow.
Oh, yeah, I think is it new?
New one on Netflix.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yep. True story. And maybe this will be a spoiler for the listeners. It's just one spot. But it's this rugby team from Uruguay that is on a plane flight, and they crash in the Andes Mountains in Chile, and it's horrible. There's quite a few that died in the crash, maybe 20 plus that survived, and they lived up there for over 2 months. And as people would pass, they would consume the bodies to just stay alive. And I mean, it's just a miraculous story.
Yeah. Wow.
So in this, husband and wife, they leave their 3 girls and they go on this flight. It crashes. They both survive. During it, though, the wife passes away, and the husband is talking to some of the other boys that are there. And I mean, they're so distraught. Obviously, they're going all this thought process of, I may die, I may not, like, I want to be home. I may have to eat my friend, just all these crazy, I just can't imagine. Anyways, they're talking, and this one boy says, what's the purpose of all this? He's like, it's just like, our lives are just wasted, and we're just going to waste away here. And the man, the husband whose wife passed, 3 girls at home, he said, this has changed me. He said, the difficulty of this, he said, I believe we're going to make it home. He said, but this isn't quoting. He said, but I now know what pure love is for my kids, and I know how I'm going to treat them. And essentially, he wouldn't have had that change of heart as a father had he not gone through that experience. And I think that's sometimes people walk away from it, but I think Jess and I had that experience. Is we had to go through that difficult time to then appreciate, or maybe not appreciate too, but in order to build and appreciate that new growth in our marriage that we had. So those difficult times, I hate them, but I'm learning to be more grateful for them.
That's awesome, man. that said, those difficult times, like maybe we're not like loving them, but they do result in some growth. And I think, probably hopefully, honestly, I do hope for everybody that kind of embraces their testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ as their own thing and not just their parents, not their friends, but theirs. I think there does come a time when maybe for a lot of people, like some questions arise, or there's concerns, or there's things like just on your heart, like weighty matters that maybe there's not clear or defined answers for, at least immediately. And so, and I know that you've alluded to this, through your testimony and through previous conversations, but during your time of growth, throughout your adult years, especially with Jess, what what have you done? Like what do you do? What have you done when you have questions or things arise that are kind of hard to grapple with? Like, what is your process, or what has been your process for kind of getting through that, and also like growing along the way and receiving revelation along the way?
Yeah, I wish I had a written down process. I think because every one of them has been quite a bit different. I think everybody's is.
Yeah, sure.
First, I think questioning anything and everything is good. I think we should. And as I had talked about in my testimony, it's actually been the last maybe 3 years, ever since the pandemic hit. Some of my testimony, maybe a lot of it, was built into how the culture is of the church. And I, for me at least, the culture of the church was really rocked when the pandemic hit. And that's what, for me, began raising a lot of questions about our own leadership and things that the church is doing that I quite frankly, I disagreed with and still do.
Sure.
And not that we need to even get into the details.
No.
And it honestly, it put me kind of into a spiral downwards. I just tried to, first I went to the internet, just trying to find any source I could to help explain my questions or answer them. And there was nothing. I spent time in the scriptures. And I should say this too, that when we are going through those hard times, at least when I am, it's not like I have this cheery like attitude about it. Like, I'm going to get through this. And, for me, I was looking at like, is this like, am I going to be leaving the church over this?
Yeah.
And, I got to a point, and this was just like 3 months ago, I'm almost embarrassed to say, that I had reached out to the bishop and I asked him to release me from my callings. Like, I didn't want any more. Like, I was at the bottom. I felt like I was like, I just can't take it anymore. I still read my scriptures and I still prayed. And maybe my prayers weren't asking the right questions. Maybe I wasn't asking the right questions. I don't know. But anyways, I was driving down south to go hunting, and I was just like, I don't cry often, but I was really just letting out a good one. And I was just like, I need help. And that's when I texted the bishop and said, I need to be released. Like, I need space away from everything. I need like family away from me right now. Not my wife or kids, but in-laws, sure. Everybody. I just need everybody away.
Yeah.
And as soon as I sent that text, I don't know what it was. As soon as I sent that text, it was after I had just cried and cried and cried and just was just done with it all. And I sent that text and I don't know what happened. I called Jess a few days later, and I had no anger in my heart anymore. None. It left.
Wow.
The bishop had never responded to my text. And so I called him afterwards, like a week later, and I said, hey, if you haven't found anybody, like I want to stay. And anyway, so we met and it worked out.
Wow.
So what I've learned since is just what that man had said. It's the trial of our faith that's more precious than gold. In that trial, we don't know how it's going to come or where. And frankly, if like we're not going to know the way out of it either. And I think that's the miracle of it. That's where God's going to pull us out of it and where we need his hand, his help. And that's what happened. So I don't have any advice for anybody, but just other than just holding on. Like I don't know. I don't know how to explain it.
I hope I'm not cutting you off mid thought.
Nope.
As you've been talking, I've had so many thoughts come to me that I think is cool because obviously you're speaking some truths here that are resonating with me. But I think have quoted this a lot on the podcast, that it's the Elder Holland quote comes to mind of like, if for a time, the harder you try, the harder it seems to get, take heart, because so it has been with the best people who've ever lived. Right. Am I summing that up correctly?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Yeah. And it's funny because I'm one of the things I love about you, Jesse, is that I feel like you are so good at just being totally authentic and real about who you are and what your testimony is. And I think that is admirable because I feel like the pressure to maintain this like level of perfectionism sometimes in the church in terms of like, oh, I have a rock solid testimony and it's always up here. I'm lifting my hand up high. You can't see that on the podcast. But honestly, I think that we kind of vacillate a little bit sometimes in our testimonies. Not that like we necessarily fall into a full-fledged faith crisis, but I do think that because we're human and because there is an adversary out there who wants to knock us off of our testimony pedestals, if you will, like, I think we need to be more aware of that like there is an opposition out there that's trying to bring us down. Yeah. And I was just talking to my sister, was in town last week, and she just got a big calling in church. And she was saying, she's like, every time I try to like strengthen myself spiritually, I feel like I have these really awful dreams. And she's like, I feel like that's how Satan attacks me, is in my dreams. And that hit me because I feel that too, where I'm like, it feels like out of nowhere, this opposition comes, and it can be so frustrating because it's like, I am doing all the things right. Like I haven't stopped reading my scriptures. I haven't stopped going to church, like still trying to be a good person. But I feel like Satan he's a jerk and he tries to come in and just knock you down sometimes. Yeah. So it was cool listening to you recount your experience because it made me think of the refiner's fire and how a lot of times I think of that as, trials coming into our lives that are, sad things happening. But a refiner's fire, our testimonies need to be refined. And I think God allows that to happen because he wants all the good stuff to rise to the top, So anyway, just some thoughts.
That fire gets hot.
Yes, it does.
It's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. And I think that shows how much he loves us as a parent, that he's not rushing in to extinguish it all the time. He's like, no, let it burn for a second. Like, let Jesse have his moment in his car, in his truck, of just crying, getting out those feelings, because he's going to come out on the other side even stronger.
Yep.
Yeah, as you're talking, it reminds me of one of my favorite verses. It's in 2 Nephi 26, I think it's verse 24, where it talks about whatever Jesus Christ does is for our benefit, for he loveth the world. Whatever he does or doesn't do for the world is basically for our benefit, is what he says. And just hearing you talk, like letting you kind of, I think in your testimony, didn't you mention, was it you or was it Kyle Hayes? It was both of you that talked about Peter. And sinking, like he does let us sink. And it's not because he's angry or disappointed or he's like, I'm just going to let him suffer from it. It's because whatever he does or does not do in our lives is for our ultimate benefit, our growth and our strength. Like we've talked about this before in the podcast too, that God is more concerned with your growth than he is with your comfort. And that's going to be an individual thing, like you mentioned, right?
For sure.
Like our questions, our trials, our challenges. It's a very personalized experience that we go through with that growth. And I know you said you didn't have like really any advice for anybody that's going through similar maybe struggles or challenges, but I'm going to put you on the spot with this question. What have you learned about Jesus Christ having gone through this experience the last 3 years?
I believe that that the plan is much bigger and better than we think. And I just know he really cares for all of us. And sometimes it's hard to feel that, but his hand's out waiting for us, and he'll accept it in his time. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the advice I give. Not that you're asking for my advice.
Please give it.
That I just have so many good friends that have just given up and just left.
Yeah.
And I was in that boat, but I was calling out for him. And I think that's maybe the point of it, is he wants us to really want him, not just say his name, but our hearts are far from him. He wants us to, I need your help. And I think that's why he lets us go through those trials.
Yeah, hearing you speak, Jesse, just reminds me of the quote from President Nelson's talk from April of 2017, before he was the president of the church. He said that in his talk, drawing the power of Jesus Christ into our lives. He says, do you remember the biblical story of the woman who suffered for 12 years with a debilitating problem? She exercised great faith in the Savior, exclaiming, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. This faithful, focused woman needed to stretch as far as she could to access his power. Her physical stretching was symbolic of her spiritual stretching. Many of us have cried out from the depths of our hearts a variation of this woman's words. If I could spiritually stretch enough to draw the Savior's power into my life, I would know how to handle my heart-wrenching situation. I would know what to do, and I would have the power to do it. And then he says this, I love this. When you reach up for the Lord's power in your life with the same intensity that a drowning person has when grasping and gasping for air, power from Jesus Christ will be yours.
That's it.
That's the truck. That's the truck experience.
That was it. Yeah.
Gosh, that's good. When the Savior knows you truly want to reach up to him, when he can feel that the greatest desire of your heart is to draw his power into your life, you will be led by the Holy Ghost to know exactly what you should do. When you spiritually stretch beyond anything you have ever done before, then his power will flow into you. And then you will understand the deep meaning of the words we sing in the hymn, The Spirit of God. The Lord is extending the saints' understanding. The knowledge and power of God are expanding. The veil over the earth is beginning to burst. The gospel of Jesus Christ is filled with his power, which is available to every earnestly seeking daughter or son of God. It is my testimony that when we draw his power into our lives, both he and we will rejoice. That just reminds me of you. That's so cool.
It's the experience. It's so good. So cool. It's so good.
That's so awesome. So, yeah, dang, anything. That's awesome. Anything you want to add to that, Jesse?
No, that's so good. I wish I would have remembered that sooner. Yeah, that's so good.
I'll send that. Oh, that is just awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for the podcast. But yeah, that's April 2017, President Nelson drawing the power of Jesus Christ into our lives. Gosh, that's cool. I haven't read that talk in a while, but while you're talking, it's like that is exactly your experience.
Yeah. Yep.
And I remember, I mean, I think I've mentioned this even before on the podcast too, but, and I don't know, I'm probably saying this wrong, but and I'm probably misremembering this as well. But when I was a kid, I remember my dad saying something similar to me, like talking about Socrates and one of his students. Socrates like takes one of his students out into like the sea, like waist deep. Have I told you about this? And I don't know if this is like a true story, but I remember my dad telling it to me, but he's like something similar to where Socrates would take his student and like take him out there and just like dunk his head and like hold his student underwater. He's like flailing around, like, what are you doing? You're killing me. And Socrates basically, oh, that's what it was. The student came to him and was like, tell me everything you know. How can I be like you? And Socrates basically dunks him and almost drowns the kid. And he's like, until you want it that bad, it won't be yours. And that's stuck with me, you know, and President Nelson's kind of saying the same thing here. Dang. Well, Jesse, I, as we're kind of coming to like the end of like the questions that I at least had in mind, I don't know if either of you want to say something right now, but, I really, really appreciate you being so open and so vulnerable, because I think it's going to help. It will help so many people, including myself. Now, knowing, you know, from your experience, I am curious, as being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what would you say that you love most about being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
It's a loaded question.
I know. That's why I'm asking.
That's a loaded question.
I specifically want you to answer this question because I know it's powerful and I know it's going to help people. You can just speak freely, my friend.
There's only one right answer. We hope we get it right.
Well, I was going to say, can I say the things that I don't love the most about it?
Yeah, sure. Let's work backwards.
No, I don't want to say, 'cause, you know, there's so many great things and there's, you know, so many not. I've always just been one that has questioned everything. And so just falling in line to just do what we're all supposed to do. It's never been in my wheelhouse. It's not how mentally, it's not how I was built. And, that's a tough question. I think what it is, maybe what it would come down to for me is that I'm grateful that I'm in an army that's fighting against Satan. And I think there's many of them, armies, but I having the restored keys of the priesthood, having a responsibility to gather Israel. I think that's what it comes down to is being in a joint force with people fighting. It gives me purpose behind what I'm doing. Otherwise it's more than I want to do all the time. So I think that's my answer.
That's great. Well, and I would agree. Thank you for sharing that. And if something else comes to mind, speak, because I just want to also add to what you said. That's honestly one of my favorite parts too, is like, you know, going to church, going to our ward and like being with the saints, being with the people, being there with you and like with our neighbors. And like our ward is so good. It's so awesome to sit there every Sunday, and it's, you know, it's almost too bad we don't get to see everybody more often, which hopefully these, you know, podcasts will help with that. But like, it is really cool to like sit down, like kind of in the ranks, shoulder to shoulder, and know, like, you know, when the chips are down, like we're in this together and we're going to rally around each other. And like, we are a family and we're all engaged, like in the fight. Like you can count on these people, and that's like invigorating. And that, like, I don't know, I can see why people, a lot of our neighborhood don't come to church. There's a lot of inactive and non-member people in this neighborhood. And I know they're not going to come, and I know my perspective is skewed, but at the same time, I'm like, gosh, even if you don't believe everything, you should just come anyway. This is such a great community. Like, look at the people around here. Like, come and be a part of this. It's free. It's run by we're just doing the best. We're just volunteers, and it's just good people trying to be good and to do good and to make a difference in the world. Like, come and be a part of it. You're not a member? Like, who cares? You smoked weed this morning? Doesn't matter. Like, come over, like, just come and be a part of it. And like, come and gather. Like you said, come and gather. And like, you know what? If you end up believing it or think there's something there more for you, awesome. But like, even just as a sense of community, I think I feel like we kind of undersell that aspect of the gospel of Jesus Christ in some ways. Like, this is an awesome thing to be a part of. And it really especially makes a difference once you get to know the people there. You get to know some people, become friends with them, and it's like, this is so cool. And like, we're just in this together. And anyway, I'm talking longer than I need to, but like, I agree. I think it's a very powerful, very cool thing to be a part of.
I just feel like I want to add a witness to that as well, since you guys are talking. Like, I'll speak up too, because I thought that was funny when you asked him that question. I was surprised by my initial thoughts too, because it's almost like my answer of my favorite thing and my least favorite thing is the same answer, and it is the people. Because it's like, you wouldn't expect that, right? Because, it just, human beings, we have a built-in handicap, and that's that we're human. And, we have opportunities to experience the best and the worst of each other all the time. And yet I love that we are just doing our best. And we saw that in action this weekend when Finn got baptized, our first kid that got baptized. And I was just really touched by this whole thing that, like, just for one little 8-year-old boy, so many people came together, and it was like Jason said, like, there is so much power in just gathering and gathering for a good cause, something uplifting. Like, you could just feel not just like the spirit in the room, like the spirit, but you could feel like the collective spirit in the room of all these good people combined and the power of that. And I just thought, man, there's so many things that people don't even realize went into this day. Like, our good bishop, whom we've referenced many times already in this one episode. He's very, very good man. I mean, he was up early filling up the font for us. He had big pots of water boiling in the kitchen at the church to pour into the font to make it somewhat tolerable, so our son wasn't, shivering in it, because it's an old font and it does not stay warm. And so I love that he's literally like boiling water for our kid. There was a mix up about building reservation stuff, which is a whole other story, but he, long story short, like, basically single-handedly saved our whole baptismal reception, if you will, afterwards, by like helping me set up chairs in the basement of the church and like getting tablecloths and just putting everything up last minute. And, he doesn't get any credit for it. Like, I witnessed this, and I could go around telling everybody about it. I think that would embarrass him, but like, just these little simple acts. And it's like, nobody is instructing him to do this. Nobody's paying him to do this. And it's most of the time goes unnoticed. And yet it's like, there's something that's just so beautiful about that to me. And like, people came and they just gave our son hugs, and they gave him little gifts and stuff to acknowledge this special day. And they wrote him notes, and I just was really touched by the goodness of people. Like, when we magnify that, it's really cool. And I think that's the main point behind the church, is that, like, God, he really does want us to become like him, and he wants us to get glimpses of what that looks like. And so we need opportunities to be around each other and to see the best of each other. And that's why we invited you into our home tonight, because you are among the best in our eyes. And not that we're ranking people or anything like that, but we want to thank you for
Where do I
being,
stand
yeah,
on the
yeah,
ranking?
you are number 93. No, I'm just kidding. No, you inspire us to be better people. And hopefully, I think that's the hallmark of a good friend and a good influence in your life is that you're motivated to be a better person by knowing them and spending time with them. So thanks for being our friend.
Amen.
Yeah. I mean, what the listeners don't know is like, I pretty much, I don't know if I mentioned this already, but I just like sprang this on Jesse like this morning. I was like, here's the questions. Can you come and do this tonight? Basically. And he was like totally down. But like it honestly, like this was like a kind of a selfishly motivated thing. Like I really sent your testimony on Sunday. Like I was like, I already love and respect you. But that testimony, I was like, I have to know that story. And I think just you just draw such a powerful point of like, sometimes the struggle is long. It can be years or even decades long, but I just love that. Like there is the power in just calling out to God, like with like President Nelson says, with all the strength of a drowning person. And maybe like, that answer or that feeling or that comfort or that relief comes immediately. Maybe it does take much longer, but that doesn't mean that we should stop calling out to him. And it doesn't mean that we should, stop gathering together. There's strength to be had. And this, like I said, it's selfishly motivated because I just wanted to hear that testimony from you, Jesse, because and I've said this to you before, and I know you don't believe me, but when you speak, like people listen, and you've got a gift for being just real and authentic and relatable. And it's like everybody has a part to play and every part is important. And thanks for letting us just extract a little bit more of that out tonight.
Thanks. It's been really fun.
So last question, unless there's something else, but if you could send just today, in January, whatever it is, 9th, 2024, if you could, from where you're at today, send one message 100 years into the future for your posterity to hear, what would it be? You got to pick one just today, maybe two.
I mean, I think for me, it's pretty obvious, obviously based on the conversation too, that stay close to God. Maybe can I just share one last story to illustrate this?
Yeah.
So I was listening to this preacher. He's a Messianic Jew, I believe. His name's Jonathan Cahn. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He's on YouTube. He's great. And he gave a message a little while ago, and he had said to this young man, he said, if you were in the kitchen of your home and a parent walked in, your mom or your dad, and said, "Hey, Nick," or "Hey, Jason, are you there?" Your reaction wouldn't be like, "Oh my, who is that? Somebody broke in." You recognize who it is. And he said that's how the whisperings of the Spirit is, how God speaks to you if you have a relationship with him. When he speaks, you'll know if you've spent time with him. And so that's probably the message I would give is whatever way that is, spend time with God, getting to know him. And then when he will talk to you, you'll recognize when he's coming in the front door.
Okay, I lied. Message. I have one more question. And you're making me ask it. How do you feel like you've best gotten to know him? How have you best gotten to know his voice?
Elder Ballard, I believe, gave a talk years ago, and I believe it's him. And he said he was talking to the young man in priesthood, and I can't actually remember the 3 items. It was how to create a good relationship with your earthly father. It was take an interest in his life, ask him questions, or seek for advice. And there was one other, and I'll remember it. Maybe I won't. but that changed the way I talk and pray. Oftentimes when I'm in my car, is that I try to get involved in his purpose, and sometimes it's silly, like, how is your day gone, God, Heavenly Father?
Yeah. Yeah.
But having more of that real conversation has gotten me out of the repetitive prayer that is, pretty common, especially with like our kids. You just get in that, bless, we'll have a good day. And,
the shopping list.
The shopping list. Yeah. And so I really just talk, and maybe sometimes it's just me talking, but that's how I've done it, is I'm a talker in my car. Once I get in, I'm never on the phone, but I'm always talking out loud. And it's, that's just how I do it.
I love it. Well, yeah. I've talked to my classes a lot about that. Like, as you just said, like, you think of, your best friends, you think of your parents, like the best relationships you have. And like, how did you get to that point, having that kind of relationship with them? And you might do stuff together, you might have shared interests, but at the end of the day, it's usually built through talking.
Mm-hmm.
Like Allie and I, like, that was one of the very first things about us. When our very first date, we went to Old Spaghetti Factory and we sat there for like 3.5 hours and just talked. We were there forever, but it was like, I was just lost in like this amazing conversation. It was so good. And like, but it is just through talking. And like President Nelson said, like you just said, it's, our prayers, they can't be the shopping list prayer. He said our prayers need to be living discussions with our Father in heaven. He's our Father. Like, if we really remember, I think, that relationship and our identity, like that we are really only one generation away from godhood. Like, literally our Father of our spirit is a God. And we just talk to him as a father. Like, of all the titles that Heavenly Father could have us address him by, he's chosen Father. Like, that should say everything about how he feels about us, about how we can approach him, and the power of that relationship can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's power in pondering too after that conversation, or maybe, in other words, waiting for that answer. I remember when I was driving up to Park City one day and I was asking a question to him, and then I immediately turned on music or something. I was at the mouth of Parley's, and I just remember thinking, like, well, I wouldn't ask Jessica a question that I want an answer and then just walk out the door kind of thing. I was like, that's like the weirdest thing I would have done.
That's great. Yeah.
I was like, that's so dumb. And so I turned it off, and then I just sat and I tried. I mean, it's not as easy to just sit and turn everything off, but I intentionally turned it off and tried to focus. And it was one of those other experiences where I got the answer like right then. It was like, bam. And it wasn't like anything big.
Sure.
I remember what it was, but it wasn't like, but anyways, it was just like, yeah, he's there. But the busyness of life is like, maybe it was Elder Bednar that said that, like, maybe not, but he said that Satan fills our lives with so many good things that we don't have time for the essential. And I think pondering and talking to God is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so easy to get lost in, watching videos and music and sports and everything else.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know that Satan needs to like throw like a lot of like the really horrible evils at us, although I think he will. But like Elder Maxwell said, God isn't so much concerned about your capability as he is your availability. And if Satan can just make you simply unavailable by distraction,
it's perfect.
He's won. He's already won. Yeah. Because you're kind of useless, right? The Holy Ghost can't get through. God can't get through. Like, you've blocked yourself off. You're maybe not doing. It's interesting. Even Jesus himself said, right? I think it was just right in Revelation that we Reddit where he's like, I would rather you be hot or cold than lukewarm. There's a lot of possible meanings behind that, but it's almost like rather you be taking action one way or another than just being distracted and droning out into whatever mindless, addiction or distraction that there is, making yourself unavailable.
Yeah. Yep.
And what's cool too, with that quote from Elder Maxwell, he says, like, if you prove your availability to God, then he will prove your capability.
So
just
good.
make yourself available and he can work with that. It's just like, well, section 4, right? If you have desires to serve God, you're called to the work. It's not if you know all the scriptures. It's not if you're called to the work, if you're like charismatic or have a good personality or whatever. It's just like, if your heart, if the desire's there, you're called, because guess what? I can work with you in your scripture knowledge. I can work with you in your ability to talk to people. I can work with your desire kind of, but that has to come from you. Just give me your desire and I can work with the rest, right? It's the fish and loaves, right? Just bring me what you have and I can work with that.
Yeah.
I don't remember how we even got down this tangent now.
That's good.
But yeah. Anyway, that's what you were talking about. It's the pondering. And just if we distract ourselves, like, and I've had that experience as well, just like praying in the car and like immediately turn on the radio or turn on a podcast. And it's like, you're right. I love that imagery. Like, I want to just like ask Allie a question and then walk out of the room. Right? I want an answer.
Yeah, right.
Well, and and like, I agree. I think pondering may be something that because anytime that we like feel bored or awkward, like even tonight, like Finn couldn't think of anything to do. I can't think of anything to do. Never mind. He just has all these toys and all these books and like whatever. And he's like freaking out because he's bored. And I'm like, bro, like that's the time, like you got to be okay with being uncomfortable and just giving yourself over to maybe some pondering. Maybe it's harder for an 8-year-old than it is for a grown-up, but still, like, again, President Nelson in his talk about the Book of Mormon said, if you ponder what you prayerfully studied in the Book of Mormon, it's only through the pondering that the windows of heaven will be open to you. And it's not just like reading just to read or just like to pray just to pray. It's like, I want to have this relationship and build it, and also like take time to like ponder and think and meditate and let the Spirit speak to me. If I'm constantly distracted, especially today with phones or whatever, then the Satan's already won. Anything you want to say before we go, Jesse?
No, this has just been so good. I think it's healthy to talk about all of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
I agree. Well, thanks for letting us have you on. Thanks for letting just kind of last minute and being so prepared and sharing your experiences and sharing your stories and just being vulnerable. Like, I think we just, like you said, it's healthy to talk about these things. And I know this episode's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And I also just want to say, I'm going to put this out there to the world. We're going to get your wife on here eventually.
Let's get her on.
I'm a huge fan of hers.
She's great.
She's wonderful.
I think she would do far better in this situation than she
gives herself credit. It's
for.
funny what a common theme that is among particularly women that we reach out to be on the podcast. That's kind of the response we get. And I'm like, the ones that we've had on have been stellar. And so maybe I'll invite her over one of these nights and just have a casual conversation and just have this like
hide
recording.
The
mic. She'll never come to our house now that I put that out there. But yeah, I agree with Jason though. I think that I hope this is a helpful podcast to people who are listening who are maybe experiencing some ups and downs in their faith, and just recognizing that that's all part of the process, I think is important, because then you don't freak out as much, I guess, if you're going through those periods of feeling like he's distant or feeling like you don't really know what's going on. I'm just going to remember that image of you in your truck because I've been there too. That's actually one of my favorite places to say vocal prayers as well, just like those conversational prayers.
Yep.
And so maybe that's just what we'll leave with people is if you have the time, make time this week to have a conversation with God in your car. Make it that simple and specific.
Yeah.
Just like the scriptures say, cry unto him. Cry over your flocks, cry over your fields, cry unto him. And he will hear your prayers and he'll answer that. We testify of that. So thanks everybody for listening. We love you. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.